Hi, I'm Rajneesh.
And I'm Bridget,
Welcome to TerreScience.
the podcast where reality matters.
Well, it's a pleasure to have Dr. J. Sanguinetti and Shinzen Young with me today for our new TerreScience podcast. And we're going to talk about mindfulness, meditation, and technologies that can enhance and help people become more mindful and also become aware of who they are and how to deal with stress. So, first, I will introduce Dr. Jay Sanguinetti. He is the Assistant Director of the Center for Consciousness Studies, and he's a co director of the Science Enhanced Mindfulness Acquisition, SEMA Lab, with Shinzen Young, who is also the co director. Shinzen Young is an author of Science of Enlightenment, and both Shinzen and Dr. Sanguinetti met in 2014 at a retreat, and I am so excited to talk about their amazing, groundbreaking work. But before we get started, welcome to TerreScience, Dr. Sanguinetti and Shinzi.
Thank you. So good to be here.
So let's start with you, Jay. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to do what you're doing now?
Sure, happy to. I started out as a philosophy major trying to really understand the mind and how this, 3 pounds of jelly in your head, the brain, can give rise to consciousness and experience and all the beautiful, life that humans get to have. And it quickly became clear that I have to go learn about the brain. I couldn't just learn about philosophy to really dig into this question. And so I became a neuroscience major. I really started studying the minutia of different cells in the brain and how they interact with each other. And most of my career has then been backing out system by system. So going from the neuron to 10 neurons to 100 to a million to a billion, and trying to really understand how all these different systems in the brain, and now the brain to the body and the body to you, we have two bodies interacting, really trying to understand the connections between all of these systems. And does that teach us something about consciousness and experience? And as I was, getting my PhD in cognitive neuroscience, I was doing a lot of inner work as well. So mindfulness, going to therapy, doing a lot of the work to refine my own inner consciousness and develop some of the skills that would help me get a PhD and help me come on podcast and things like that. And, meeting Shenzhen back in 2014, 2015, and then working with him really starting in 2018, it was really where my training, my PhD neuroscience training and my inner training kind of came together. And I started trying to ask, can I help people meditate? Can we understand meditation? What does meditation have to do with consciousness? That kind of stuff. So, it's been a joy working with Shenzhen in these years, and it's really helped to pull those paths together and made it very clear to me what I'm doing.
That's great. And I remember when I visited, I think you were just starting the lab in Arizona. And I met you and Shinzen and saw the setup. And it was impressive even back then what you were thinking. And Shinzen, please tell us about you and how did you get involved with SEMA?
I was just a weird kid interested in weird shit, if you pardon my French, that no one else was interested in, but I was. And now look, now it's everywhere.
So
This
Shinzen,
was not.
how many languages do you know?
No, I just know a couple, but I'm familiar with more than a couple. But every linguist is familiar. Linguists can pick up languages in a week. I mean, you know what to look for. Uh, but in any event, how I would define mindfulness practice from the viewpoint of science: systematic, focus training in the service of multidimensional happiness of a very specific kind, that includes multi-level self-understanding and multi-directional personal behavior improvement. That's my definition
That's
for what we're
that's
looking at with mindfulness research.
that's beautiful, and I think so. This is a really good segue into the science of acquiring that stage, which I'll ask Jay to tell us. But before we go there, I have a question for you, Shannon. So I think that is really beautiful. It describes how I think of it, but I could not put it into words that way. So it's a really good description. The way I think of it, and I think it comes from my upbringing in Indian culture, is to distance oneself from everything else and becoming mindful of that you are. But some people think that I'm talking about dualism. I'm not. I'm not talking about dualism, but it's like knowing you as something distancing from everything else that's going on, and like you said, realizing at multidimensional level that everything that is going on, and knowing who you are. But I could not put them in the beautiful words that how you said it.
I
No,
think
we're
this is
fine.
the point that we turn it over to Dr. Sanguinetti.
Yes. So Jay, tell us about mindfulness is this description, and so how what is the science in how to acquire it?
Yeah, well, thank you, Shenzhen. That was beautiful, and I'm glad we got that on camera, so that's out there, and we can all study the definition later. Just to give a little contrast to your listener, so the field, which is now called contemplative neuroscience, so that's the field of science that studies mindfulness and also yogic breathing and other things like that. The field, Shinzen gave a beautiful description of a bit of where the field is at, which is we are struggling to define mindfulness in a way that we can measure it. That's called an operational definition in science. You want to define it so you can use some type of tool to measure that. It's been very hard. And so the state of the contemplative neuroscience is a recognition of exactly what Shinzen just beautifully said, which is different researchers have been defining this thing called mindfulness in different ways. They've probably actually been measuring different things, some of which may be close to mindfulness and some not. Maybe it's not a thing you can measure at all. That's a bit where the field is at right now. And that's how science works, right? It doesn't mean we failed. It actually means the science is maturing and developing. And the typical definition has been John Kabat-Zinn's, which I have here on the screen, which is mindfulness is a form of awareness that arises through paying attention. So that's the focus piece that Shinzen talked about, on purpose. And on purpose is a really hard thing to measure. To the present moment, which you just said, science has a hard time measuring the present. And then non-judgmentally. So you're bringing an attitude of non-judgmental to it. What is attention? That's a really hard thing to measure. What does on purpose mean? What does non-judgmentally mean? Right? So the field sort of started there, and there was a recognition that we have to refine this definition down to something that we can really measure, and then really measure it in a way that we see an effect on it. And that's really where Shinzen is going, and talking about the training, and then talking about the training in terms of this map of multidimensional happiness. Now we can look at a map of effects of how that training is affecting it. So, that's all to say that's really where the lab has gone. We started out just like every other contemplative neuroscience lab, trying to ask, how do we measure mindfulness and how do we parse it into different pieces? And very quickly learned that that's an exceptionally hard problem from the scientific point of view. And really started moving more towards the training and really trying to ask about the training. Can we impact the training with technology? So that's one thing that the lab is really focused on is, can we develop neurotechnology like non-invasive brain stimulation that can actually facilitate or accelerate the training? That's question number one in the lab. And then number two, is that actually useful for the user? Does it actually enhance the deep and broad levels of happiness that Shinzen is talking about? Not only in the lab, but the really important question is, does it help them outside of the lab, right? Because we really want to impact their life, and we want to give them the tools that make all that stuff that Shinzen was talking about available in their lives. That's really the deeper question here. So that's what the lab is focused on. And so far, we've been looking at things like brain stimulation. So ultrasound is a form of brain stimulation we've used. And we've started targeting different circuitries in the brain that develop as you develop your mindfulness skills. And we've asked, can we help develop those a little faster? Of course, as safe as possible. And as we do that, does that actually become useful for the person? Can they gain some skills like equanimity, for example? And can they use that in their lives? You know, that it's always coming back to that question. So it's been a fun adventure. If you look on our website, you'll see me and Shinzen wearing all these sci-fi contraptions. It looks like we're in some kind of cyberpunk, movie or something. And
Yeah, but I've seen some of the public papers and also your talks. And tell us a little bit about amazing correlation that you've been able to develop with EEG, with the meditative state, because I think that's sort of a result, which is something right there to look at.
sure. We started with functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, so looking at, the pretty brain maps that you see coming out of neuroscience. And we did that first because we really want to ask basic scientific questions. Does the tool work? Can we reach the part of the brain that we really want to target? And does that lead to the type of effects that we would predict from all the thousands of contemplative meditation studies? So a lot of it over the pandemic was basic science. You have to start, basic and then grow to the vision that we want to get it to. And so the first place we started actually in the lab here in Tucson was at the default mode network, which is a part of the brain that is a very healthy system that you have. It's sort of the part of the brain that comes online when you're thinking to yourself, when you're mind wandering, when you're planning and you're daydreaming. It's a very important part of the brain. But this part of the brain can become overactive. And for many of your listeners, they probably have had times in their lives where that voice has been a little mean. Maybe it's hard to shut that voice off. You say something that you don't like on a podcast and you think about it for days. That can become a problem. And so that's sort of the overactive default mode network. On the other end of the spectrum, if you've done psychedelic therapy, for example, or if you go on a Vipassana retreat for 10 days, what tends to happen there is the system quiets down a little bit. And we sort of think about that like it's sort of getting out of your way. You're getting yourself out of the way so you can do the practice or you can do therapy, for example. So this becomes sort of a target for our brain stimulation. And the basic question was, can we modulate that system? Can we cool it down? Does that actually become useful for training meditation? And so in the first study, we just had people in the MRI scanner. We had a brain stimulation system on while the person's getting their brain scanned. And we're targeting their particular default mode network in real time. And we started finding right off the bat, even before people are meditating, that it puts them in a mindfulness-like state. Now, that's very hard to define, as we've talked about. But basically, it allows people to have a little less sort of self-interference. The little voice in the head was a little quiet, but only for a short amount of time. And people actually tended to report higher state mindfulness. So they're actually more present and more in the moment. And this was pretty amazing. This was just the first study that we did. And Shinzen and I, we keep getting lucky as we do science. You don't always get lucky in science, but this was one of those like, holy cow, we're really getting lucky here.
Well, I think it's more than luck. I think you're betting on certain knowledge and experience that has been around for a long time. One of the things that comes up very frequently is the loss of ego. Like you lose ego. So I know the default mode network, DFM, it has some correlation to ego in a way. I would say maybe I'm not sure, but is this what we are in your experiments? Maybe what we're talking about is that shutting down some of those DFN and activities that are more related to self and reaction to things, that voice that goes on, versus this mindfulness, like we just described, is putting a little bit distance between all of that. So, I mean, that makes sense to me that we should be able to turn certain parts of neuronal network on, which are involved in that part rather than the other part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The important word that you use there is correlation. So I want to highlight that first, because the default mode network has definitely been correlated to self-processing. but we have to be careful that it's a correlation. It's not to say that's where the self is. Even as I study it, I have to be careful with that. So I just want to point that out, not saying that you were doing that, but definitely as we put you in the scanner, if I trigger you, if I get your self real activated, we'll see this area sort of overactivated. And one of the goals here would be to loosen that self structure just a bit, because the self is very important. You need a self to motivate you and move in the world and drive a car and do all the things that the self does. But one thing that happens with ayahuasca ceremonies and therapies, with mindfulness practice, and to be honest, going into a flow state if you're on a bicycle, right? I mean, these things happen to people every day, is that you get a bit of distance from some of that selfing stuff. That can be very helpful for people, especially if you're trying to train something like attention. If you can get out of the way a minute and stop telling yourself about climate change and the world ending for a minute, let that go in the background and focus your attention, right? That can help you gain that skill. And so that's really what we seem to have been able to do so far, is it's not like a psychedelic where you have an ego death, but it's more like just a slight cooling down of that system, so it gets out of the way. Yeah.
To a tuning down. All right. This is really interesting to me, particularly because I'm interested in consciousness, and this does bring up that question. So if there is these are two modalities. One is the default mode network, and then there is something that is mindfulness, maybe a little bit distancing, then consciousness. And I believe in non-dualism. I think there is one thing. So that actually fits in the way I think about consciousness, because to me consciousness is a process, just like photosynthesis is a process, and interaction with the environment. We are constantly immersed in what's going on, and maybe this default mode network has a very important job to keep us alive, and it continuously keeps guiding us what to do, to help us. But that's not us. That's not self, like you said. That's not self. That's the processing of information for the self. But then the other state, the mindfulness, is knowing that these two things are happening. One way to think about it. But so now, if we go to the psychedelics, do you think that psychedelics, and I know there is already some research, especially with DMT and 5-MeO DMT as well, where certain parts of the brain neuronal network light up, which tend to be more either in the dream state, or some parts which are not even. This is a slightly old paper, but I think there's even more advances in this area. So you think there's some overlap with the psychedelics and with what we are talking about?
Certainly, yeah. There's definitely overlap, and the psychedelics, they tune the system. They go to the receptor sites and they just crank up the gain or lower the gain all the way, and in the right context. So if you're in a therapeutic setting, for example, or with friends, and it's very safe and calm environment, you can have deep insights. And part of the reason for that is because you have billions of neurons, right, in your brain that are constantly firing and giving you the experience and the sense of self and everything that you have. Now you reorient that such that you can see the stimulus. Let's say I'm in therapy and I'm healing something around with my parents. Let's say that's a typical thing that happens for people. Now when the picture of my father comes up, I have reoriented to that input, and I can experience it from a completely different perspective. That can be very insightful for people if it's done, in an integrated way. So, all of these things are sort of shifting the system in a way where you can experience sensory stimuli from different ways. But, from our point of view, one of the really important parts of all of that is the state and the insight, obviously very important, but it's really also about how you bring that back in the body and process it over time. So how you integrate that into who you are in the future and who you become. And so it's really the sort of state transition that you have, plus the practices that you're doing, which may be therapy, for example, it might be mindfulness practice. So it's just like you said, everything is in motion, everything is processed, everything in your body, every neuron is processing, every piece of DNA is processing all the time. It never stops. And so you have no choice but to continuously work with that processing. And so that's the real key, we think, is for all of these things that are shaking up the ego self system, is you got to give it a container to process it in.
That's really cool. And I know there is also artificial intelligence that can be utilized here. I know Elon Musk is going to upload the human brain and put a chip in the brain. So, any thoughts on the role of AI in this?
Shinzen, you want to take that one?
You start, I'll join in. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, Shenzhen and I, we think very long term, and we think very broad and grand. And so, thinking about psychedelics and neurotech, so the brain stimulation is a form of neurotech, that's giving you a state change, right? So you can have this sort of perspective shift we talked about. Then you've got the training. So you've got, what do you do with all that? You got to train the system. You got to train your neurons and your muscles. And then it's like, how do you scale this out? How do you get this stuff out to 8 billion people? We have 8 billion people now, right? And so, we and mostly Shenzhen has been pushing me in this direction recently, because I'm becoming convinced. But the AI is a real chance to scale out the training. So you can get the broad information about how do you train your system. Shenzhen's developed a beautiful system called Unified Mindfulness, that I'm actually going through the coaching training right now, and it's a great system, but there's only one of me, and I can only teach maybe 10 people, in a couple months. But you could teach these new AI bots, like the OpenAI bot, to teach lots of other people as an entry level. So you give people the training so they can bring it into their lives. Then maybe you can do the brain zap, and then you go, become a mindfulness coach yourself, right? So you've got a sort of way to bring people into the whole system. So really think that there's a role for AI to be there to help people do the training. In the long term, I also think AI can be there for support, because as you scale this tech, and honestly, as you scale psychedelics out, the other important piece besides training is you have to support people, because it's going to be messy. We're talking about the human mind and the human condition. It's messy. Go read any art, right? Any poetry, and any novels, especially novels from Russia in the 1950s to the 1970s. But so it's messy, and you need support for that, right? And AI, I think, can be a beautiful support system to bring some of the tools that people like Shenzhen have created out to the masses. So it's not just a fun chatbot, but it's a chatbot for human happiness, for that whole grid that Shenzhen was talking about.
As Jay mentioned, one of the things we do is system science. We like to think about the really big picture. I'm going to talk as though the future has happened.
This is your vision. This is your vision.
We have bright bots, and here's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they're certified by an international organization, same as other things are certified. Your car has been inspected. That the electronics in here isn't going to do something dangerous. Someone that you trust has said this device. So I'm assuming there's a way to certify these things. And first of all, a Brightbot is fully conversational. If you were talking across the screen, you wouldn't know it wasn't a human being. And a Brightbot speaks all the languages that we're likely to ever need. So, fully conversational, fully, I'm going to say, what was the phrase I had for that? Tuning. It's fully tuning. It tunes to exactly who you are and becomes the best friend no amount of money could ever buy, except you can have a whole team of them. They all do the same thing. it's looked forward and it sees who you could become in the future. And it's constantly giving you the little nudges in the areas of life where you're willing to make change.
I can see this. You're right. I think this is going to happen, and it's what you're describing is really a multi-personality simulating multiple relationships, not just a guru, because you can have a person play a role, but they can only play a certain role all the time or some of the times. But Raymond or someone like that, the bright part is not only your friend, is your guru, and it knows everything and is guiding you to express the best of
It's a
yourself in the
Kalyana
future.
Mitra.
Is the Kalyana
Kalyana
Mitra.
Mitra. Kalyana
Yes,
Mitra. For
yeah.
Sarvodaya.
Kalyana,
Sarvodaya,
that's right.
everyone
Yeah,
gets a Kalyana Mitra
Mitra.
for
Yeah,
for Kalyana
Kalyan,
Mitra for
Mitra. Mitra means friend, which is
and it
Kalyana.
literally
So
means
friend,
companion.
companion. Yes,
Yeah.
Kalyana for Kalyana for a companion, a friend forever, for betterment. It's
Yes.
beautiful. I
A
think
good
that
friend.
that is, yes, that I think is, I would think that is going to happen. I just hope that it's not easily hackable.
Oh,
To
it will be completely hackable.
yeah,
That's the whole point. It doesn't matter. Anyone can
yeah.
take it. Anyone can do what they want with it. It'll be open source and free.
And I'm working on the other half part of this. I think you've covered taking care of the mind and the brain in a beautiful way. I've been trying to work on taking care of food, to make food accessible, a good, nutritious, healthy food. We've been working on some AI programs on bringing food to people. A lot of it, reducing waste. I think that is the future. If we can have technology that can support your basic needs, what to eat, what is there to eat, how can I stay healthy, how can I take care of myself mentally. These are so important things, and both of you are doing
Now
some really
you're
amazing work.
creating self-help software in the nutrition area. Is that correct?
It's self-help software in finding, identifying where local nutritional food is, and then being able to access it conveniently
Right.
without too much cost. Yeah.
And if you wanted, you could have a button on your site that would give for free an entire guidance in lifetime guidance in mindfulness. You could have a link to my Raymond. It's free,
So
and
done.
an entire path
It's
is right there.
so Shinzig, yeah, mindful eating. We call it conscious eating, but mindful eating. So Shinzig, actually, I'm very serious. We should talk about it. I have an IT team. We've developed this app. It's available already for in the App Store and in Android. Maybe we can meet. You're in the Bay Area now. Let's do this. Let
I'm
us
not.
integrate.
Jay is.
Oh, you're not.
I'm
Okay.
still in Tucson. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm sure you come visit Jay sometimes, so we should meet. But let's integrate this, Raymond. I think that is a brilliant idea. We want to provide easy access for self awareness and self nutrition. Those are the two most important things. I think that we need to. If we provide those, the world can be a much better place. I hope. Yeah, yeah. So let's do that. Well, this was absolutely fantastic. Would you like to talk about, mention anything else? Anything that's going on that you'd like to share with the
Jay,
listeners?
you wanna
Highlight
you wanna
anything?
say anything?
Just to round out the topic of alignment and really what you just said, so thank you for sharing that with us. I think part of the work, and not just for our work here, but for whatever people are working on, is really value aligning their work to the deeper things that they're really needing, meaning and purpose and presence in the moment. Why are we talking so much about this in the first place? So I think that there is a good conversation around trying to align the inner stuff with the outer work that you're doing, and that transcends all domains. It doesn't matter if you're a computer programmer at Google or working on food security. The alignment is the really important piece. And that's why we're arguing for doing so the inner alignment, so you even know what you're doing in the first place, and what your body is telling you, and what really is giving you purpose and meaning. But that alignment can happen in anything, and I think that's sort of what we're going through as a species right now, is trying to align our economies, our blockchains, our internet. We're trying to align it all, and I think that's really an important conversation to be had.
Well, I want to reinforce that statement because I don't think it ever ends. Some people, and you can tell when I meet people, like when I met you for the first time. I was at the airport and you were there, and I can tell people who have achieved some level of this alignment. And like I was saying, there is never end to it. It's a continuous process. So I think most of us who have figured this out, we realize that there is so much more to be done to help people get this more, because once you realize this, nothing that you can do for yourself matters anymore. There is very little that matters that you do for yourself. What is more exciting is to be able to see what impact you can have. There is so much power in this alignment within yourself that as soon as you achieve it, it starts to show you all this amazing possibility outside. And that, I think, is just absolutely amazing. I think the tools that you've developed with ultrasound, and by the way, are these available? Can people contact you, or I mean, what stage are we at with this SEMA?
Well, you go to Walgreens or Amazon and you put in wearable, self-contained, affordable, closed loop, high impact, high precision, medical grade ultrasonic brain zapper, and you no, you can't buy this in any store, but hopefully it's coming to a doctor's office in a couple years. Jay, you want to address that?
Well, yeah, in the lab, we're working on it, and I think this type of tech is coming from many different domains. We're not the only group, actually, and there's also psychedelics, which is, as we've talked about, are in the same domain. So it's all coming. I think within the next half decade or so, these tools are coming out, and the goal is to make sure that the builders are value aligned, to create that tech, to do what we all want to do here, which is help people and reduce suffering and give people access. Because the short answer is actually yes, everyone who's listening already has all this available inside of them. And these tools are just trying to let a little bit more of that free. And so we got to make sure that the building of these tools is aligned with that deeper stuff. So, but yeah, it's all coming.
Yeah, it does help. I think even for me, that one experience that I had in Brazil, it nudged me in such a way that I since then, like Shinzen was mentioning before, I think once you go down this path, it's just you kind of keep learning and learning and learning. It's but to realize that you can do this without any help, but help is can be very important, especially in difficult times. And I think the idea of Raymond, the bright part, is brilliant. And we will talk more about integrating this into the food app for sure. And but this has been absolutely amazing. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you to both of you
Us too.
for
Yeah.
joining us on this podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Things that motivate me are the beauty of our environment and the uniqueness of our planet, of course, but also the people I've met and the fact that people do want to play a stewardship role.
Welcome to TerreScience.
The podcast where reality matters.
I thought microtubules might be processing information at this basic level. Here we are, another 30 years later.
I can actually say it. I'm going to be a scientist.
Excellent, you will be.
What was fascinating is what emerged from that was also a transformation in their consciousness.
If I try to do that, we're going to go down that rabbit hole.
Because I wrote it for people like you to get a sense of field biology, for women to appreciate the challenges.
In that process of detection, that molecule momentarily is bound to us. It becomes part of us. So it's this incredibly intimate encounter that we have with the things of the world around us.
We are consistently asking what's wrong with the student rather than what's wrong with the educational system today.
Maybe somebody will be inspired to also go into this field someday too. That would be amazing.
Well, I hope so.
Welcome to the TerreScience podcast.
The podcast where reality matters.
My name is Rajneesh. I'm a plant scientist at Carnegie Institution at Stanford University and an entrepreneur attempting to upgrade our food systems and our planetary footprint for the benefit of Earth and humanity.
And my name is Bridget. I'm a current graduate student and former vertical farmer, and I'm very passionate about public education and increasing access to healthy and nutritious foods. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube under TerreScience, or follow the links in the description below to learn more. We'll see you in the next one.